What's up guys, Dan with Create Minis here. Today I'm going to paint up a Dewback, one of my favorite models in Star Wars Legion to paint. But before we get into that, I just want to make a quick announcement about the channel and the schedule in which I'm going to be releasing videos. I'm trying to get something a little more standardized going on, and with everything else I've got going on with the commissions and running all my other stuff with Create Minis, I've decided that every 15th and 30th of the month we're going to get new videos. So every 2 weeks, look for one in the middle of the month and one at the end of the month. It'll be something a little more standardized. And for those of you who are subscribed, if you're not, click the button down below. You can expect a new video on the 15th and 30th of every month. But right now we're focused on Dewbacks, so let's get painting one. The Dewback is arguably one of my favorite Star Wars Legion models to paint. Between its iconic look and ease of painting, it really is an enjoyable experience. As with any of our other Star Wars Legion models, we begin by prepping it for primer by scraping the mold lines and cleaning the model. To start out, there aren't any too egregious mold lines you need to worry about. Just be careful of the ones on the legs and around the harness area where the different parts of the model meet up. Sometimes there's a little bit of plastic overhanging, and just remove this with the back edge of your X-Acto knife. Once I've taken care of all the pesky mold lines, I'll dry fit this to make sure there aren't any big gaps I need to worry about, and then proceed to do the same with the Stormtrooper. Now, I'm not going to show you how to paint an entire Stormtrooper model for the sake of brevity in this video, but drill the body out, attach it to a toothpick, and then follow this amazing tutorial up above. With your models assembled, prime them with a nice matte white primer. I use a 2x Rust-Oleum primer. You can use any sort of primer that you like, as long as it leaves a nice even coat. To begin our first color of paint, I'm going to be using Vallejo's Yellow, and I'm going to be painting the underside of the model towards the middle. So basically under the chin, neck area, and down the stomach. Now when you're applying this color, you want to be generous with it and kind of sloppy. Don't try and make too many straight lines or jagged edges with the paint. You're actually going to be blending this in with the green we're going to put on later. You want this to have a natural flow like a lizard naturally would. You want it to look like nature created it, not man-made, so you don't want any real sharp edges or stark contrast between the two colors. We're actually going to be blending them into a smoother finish. Once you've got the underside finished, work the color up the sides a little bit, and that's where we'll be blending the green in. Next, I take my yellow and I add just a dab of a color called Refractive Green from Vallejo. Now, I'm going to be using this as the base coat, but for this step, I'm actually taking our yellow and just mixing a little bit in. I create a nice border around the yellow that I just painted, then completely remove the paint from my brush and maybe add a touch of water, and I can easily wet blend the two together, getting rid of that harsh edge. Do the same along the entire model of the Dewback. Paint that nice edge with that blended color of yellow and refractive green, and then come back with a clean brush and blend the green into the yellow. Again, you want to be nice and random with this. You don't want a nice straight line. You want it to be kind of wavy and zigzag and make a nice smooth blend. If you get too much paint, wipe it off on your paper towel and go back at it and keep blending. Once you're done, you should have a semi-smooth gradient. Don't worry, the shade we throw on it later will help blend it even more. Next, we're going to take our pure refractive green and paint the remainder of the model. We'll also be using this to blend in the edges between our blend that we have before and the pure color refractive green. At this point, you can paint the mouth. Painting the lip part of the Dewback, bordering the teeth, be careful not to get too much paint on the white teeth themselves. Then, go back using the same technique, clean your brush. If you need to, add just a touch of water and blend the two colors together. If your paints are wet enough, you won't need the extra water, but if they've begun to dry, carefully add just a little bit of water to the mix. You can see when I'm done here the nice smooth transition that I have. This will be even furthered with the wash we're going to be putting on it later. For the top half of the head, we're just going to be doing the solid color of refractive green. Now, paint the main body of the Dewback the same solid color. Don't worry about slopping a little bit of paint on the harnesses, as we'll be painting them later, and that's going to create our nice solid edge between the brown and the green. Your biggest concern during this step is not to leave any white spots in the little nooks and crannies between the different straps and bags on the Dewback and the skin. Make sure you get the paint deep into each crevice. Then, use that blending technique and smooth out the color gradient. Here you can see me take that sharp line down the tail and gradually turn it into a more casual gradient. If you like what you've seen so far, do me a favor and shoot me a like or leave a comment down below. Notice also on the leg, I've used multiple thin coats of green so that way I can get it deep into the scales. If your paint is too thick, it won't get into the recesses, and it'll also take away some of the texture when it dries. Multiple thin coats are better than one thick coat. Now, for the interior of the mouth, I'm going to paint the tongue and the roof of the mouth with red. Take care here not to get red all over the inside of the teeth. Granted, you won't be able to see them perfectly, but you also don't want to slop it all over where you will be able to see it from the outside. Once you've painted them both red and allowed time to dry, we're going to add a shade. For this, we're going to be used Carlsberg Crimson. Now, paint the bit inside the Dewback's mouth brown. I believe it's actually called the bit. I'm not sure. It's the part that he bites down on that's attached to the harness. For this, along with all the other harnesses and saddlebags, I'll be using the color chocolate brown. At this point, also paint the top of the mouth brown. You don't want to see any white when you assemble the Dewback's mouth back together, so this is naturally where the bit would fit in. Clean up the surrounding areas of the bit and harness using the refractive green so that way you don't see any white during assembly. After you're done, let it dry, add a little bit of super glue, and you can glue the head together. As you can see here, I've got a couple little white spots where my paint did not get into the recesses. Thin some more paint down and get rid of these as you go. The texture on these models is pretty intense, so if your paints are a little too thick, they won't flow into all the recesses. Now, before we attach the head to the rest of the Dewback, we're going to take our chocolate brown and paint the edge of the harness, so that way you don't see a white line in the seam. I quickly throw some brown on the model. It's nothing perfect as I'm going to be going back over it to make a nice clean coat. This is just to prevent us from seeing a sharp white line where the original model and primer were. We're going to prep the back side of the model the same way. Paint the saddlebags and any parts where the seams will match that chocolate brown color. This is a great time while the tail's out of the way to not only paint the edges of the harness, but also to line in the area around where the Stormtrooper sits on the saddle. Speaking of great times, it's also a great time to check out my Patreon down below. There you can find a PDF format for all the paints I use in this video and a link to my Discord so we can talk directly about how well your paint job is going. Once you've got a base coat on that harness, get your brush to a fine point and run it along the edge, creating that nice sharp line between the Dewback and the harness. Once that's complete and had time to dry, throw a little bit of super glue on there, we can put the two halves together. Now with the halves together, it's time to paint in the rest of the harnesses. This is where you're going to create your sharp edge between the harness and the Dewback itself. So take your time and use multiple thin coats if needed to create a nice sharp line. After all of that, here's what your Dewback should look like. Now we're ready to add a little bit of texture and a little bit of depth. For that, we're going to be using some washes. The first wash we're going to be using is called Asmodean Camel Shade from Citadel. It's a green camel shade wash, and it'll add a lot of depth to the scales, as you can see here. We're going to be coating the entire model except for the harnesses. You'll see here how it helps take that gradient from green to yellow by darkening that yellow into a nice color. Make sure you go back wherever it pools up a little bit unnaturally and dab that away with your brush. After a little time to dry, and here's how your Dewback looks. As you can see, the texturing and the gradient from yellow to green has improved significantly. Now, we're going to take some Eggrex Earthshade and liven up these saddles and straps a little bit. Once dried, the Eggrex Earthshade will add a shine and also a little bit of color variation to give it more of a leathered look. Don't worry, the shine will go away when we throw the matte varnish on in the end. After that, take your Stormtrooper that I taught you how to paint in the tutorial above and attach it to your Dewback. Now let's add just a little bit more life to this model by detailing in some features. Let's start with the claws. For this, you're going to use Ragoth Flesh. After that dries, we're going to use a touch of Reikland Flesh Shade from Citadel. After you've coated the nails, go back and get rid of all the unnecessary pooling around the edges of them. With that done, let's do our final detailing by adding some gold accents to not only the harnesses, but the Stormtrooper himself. For this, we're going to use the color Retributor Armor from Citadel. It's a great gold metal flake paint. I start out by painting all of these bands along the harnesses. Now, they may be leather, but I find the touch of gold adds a nice pop and a bit of character to the model. I'll also do this with the little buckles on the saddlebags, and then we'll move on to the Stormtrooper. For the Stormtrooper, I'll touch these little buttons on top of his pauldron for a hint of gold, and then in the rod that he's holding, let's liven it up by taking all of the little bands around him and painting them gold as well. As you can see, just that touch of gold really brings some life to the model. Now, speaking of life, let's paint some eyes on this bad boy. Starting with yellow, let's put a nice little base coat. Then, water down some black, and let's touch a tiny pupil in there. Don't worry if you overrun just a little bit with either color, as we'll touch that up next. Finally, framing the eye itself with our original color, refractive green. After that, all this needs is a stellar base, which you can find out how to do at the link above. This base took me under 10 minutes to make. So there you have it, guys, a quick and easy way to paint up a Dewback. If you liked what you saw, hit the like and subscribe button down below so that way you don't miss any future videos. Also, drop a comment on what you might want to see going forward. Remember, I'll be releasing new videos on the 15th and 30th of the month, and if you'd really like to support the channel, I have links down to my Patreon below. Patrons will get special perks such as PDF downloads of this video and all the other videos I've included in that, and we'll get a private link to a Discord channel in which you can talk with me one-on-one outside about anything Star Wars Legion. Come join us, it's a great place to meet some new people and talk some Star Wars. And until next time, I'll see you in the middle of the month. Keep creating.